I grew up believing that some daughters are simply born invisible. At least that's how it felt being the eldest in the Mitchell household. From the outside, people would have said we were a perfect suburban family. White picket fence, 2 children, church on Sundays, smiles in Christmas photos. But behind those photos was a truth I learned far too early. Only one child mattered. And it wasn't me. My younger sister Madeline, Maddie to everyone else, was the golden girl. Every achievement of hers, no matter how small, became a family holiday. A dance recital where she stumbled on stage but finished smiling. Dad bought her flowers bigger than the bouquet Mom carried on her wedding day. A B+ in math. They called it resilience and bragged about her spirit. Meanwhile, I was the quiet achiever. Straight A's, science fair trophies, debate team medals. My acceptance into a top state university on full scholarship. These things earned me polite nods, maybe a distracted, "That's nice, Clara," while my parents checked their phones or discussed Maddie's next big performance. I remember one night in high school. I had just been awarded a regional prize in biomedical science, my project featured in the local newspaper. I came home with the clipping in my hand, heart full of hope that maybe, just maybe, this time they would see me. But when I walked through the front door, Maddie was already twirling in the living room, showing off the new shoes Mom had bought her that afternoon. Everyone clapped. My article went into the kitchen drawer, never mentioned again. Invisible. That's what I was. Not unwanted exactly, just background noise in a house that only had one spotlight. Over the years, I told myself it didn't matter. I poured my energy into books, into science, into the idea that one day I would build a life so undeniably solid that even my family's blindness couldn't ignore it. But the ache never really left. By the time I reached my 20s, the pattern was set in stone. Maddie's birthdays were extravaganzas with rented halls and themed cakes. Mine? Dinner at home, sometimes forgotten until I reminded them. Maddie got hugs, attention, admiration. I got the responsibility of being the mature one, the one who didn't need praise because I was strong. Strong. That word clung to me like both armor and curse. Then came the moment that branded itself into my memory. It was the summer before my wedding, though at the time I wasn't even engaged. We had one of those family reunions where every distant cousin seemed to appear out of thin air, crowding into my grandmother's backyard. Long folding tables stretched across the grass, each with neat name cards. I walked down the row scanning for mine, stomach fluttering at the thought of being included this time. There was a card for Andrew, my cousin who barely visited. A card for Claudia, an aunt twice removed. A card for Maddie, of course. Hers was at the center of the main table with a little gold star sticker as if she were some kind of guest of honor. But for me, nothing. "Mom," I asked quietly, holding back the sting in my throat. "Did they forget my card?" Patricia, my mother, waved her hand without looking at me. "Oh, don't make a fuss, Clara. Just sit where there's space." Where there's space, not where you belong, not where you're wanted, just anywhere you can fit without being in the way. So I sat at the very end of the last table, between 2 children too young to remember my name. Nobody noticed. Nobody cared. And Maddie, she gave me that smug little smile across the yard. The one that told me she knew exactly where I sat. And that she liked it that way. That night, lying awake in my childhood bedroom, I made myself a promise. One day, I would build a life where I wasn't an afterthought. One day, I would stand so tall that the family who always overlooked me would have no choice but to see what they had lost. At the time, I had no idea just how far that promise would carry me, or how much it would cost when the day of my wedding finally arrived. I met Ethan Ross at a conference I almost skipped. Biomedical startups, poster sessions, stale coffee, the usual background music of ambition. He was there representing his family's manufacturing firm, tall and solid in a way that made rooms feel less sharp. We argued politely about supply chains, then found ourselves laughing over bad muffins and the mutual relief of finding one honest person in a hall of sales pitches. He texted me a link to an article I'd mentioned on our way out. I replied with a thank you and a joke about the muffins. By the end of the week, I knew the cadence of his kindness, steady, unperformed. On our third date, he ordered a second set of fries, because the first basket is always an audition. On our fifth, he asked more questions about my research than anyone in my family ever had. When he met my eyes, it wasn't to search for a reflection of himself. It was to see me. He met my parents 6 months later. I sent the group text with premature hope. Dinner at 7? Ethan's excited to meet you. Laura replied with a thumbs up. Richard sent nothing. At the table, Ethan told a funny story about his mother, Linda, accidentally watering a silk plant for a year and then confessing it to the entire family. My parents smiled like people watching closed captions. When Ethan offered to help clear plates, Laura said, "Guests sit," then handed the dish towel to me. This was the math I knew. Praise less, expectation more. But Ethan didn't take the temperature of the room. He set his own. Walking me to the car, he squeezed my hand. "You're quiet," he said. "You don't have to be." He proposed on a rainy Sunday in my little kitchen with the leaky tap. No spectacle, just a simple ring, oval diamond, thin band, and a sentence I felt in my bones. Let's build a life where you never have to audition to belong. I said yes with the kind of certainty that doesn't need fireworks. Later, when we told his parents, Linda cried, and Charles brought out a bottle he'd been saving for something that actually matters. His sister Olivia tackled me with a hug that knocked my elbow into the counter and made me laugh like a teenager. When I told my parents, Laura's first question was, "How soon?" Richard followed with, "How much?" Maddie texted a row of heart emojis, and then 5 minutes later, a photo of her latest manicure. Look, engagement-ready hands. I told myself not to read the subtext. I failed. We started planning. Ethan wanted whatever made me feel celebrated. I wanted something elegant but human, ivy-covered chapel, afternoon light, a reception where people could actually talk. Emily Carter, my best friend since freshman year, took the helm like she'd trained for it. Spreadsheets, mood boards, a folder of venues labeled yes, maybe, only, if we're desperate. Every time a vendor called me princess, Emily corrected them with a smile. Scientist, princess optional. Save the dates went out. I mailed ours early to my parents so the information couldn't get lost. 2 days later, Laura called. "You know your grandmother's recipe swap is that month. Could you move the date? It would be easier for people." "Easier for who?" I asked. "For family," she said, as if the word were an answer and not the problem. We didn't move it. We booked the chapel, sent the invitations, and chose lilies because the florist said they smelled like clean pages. When I told Maddie she'd be maid of honor, she pouted theatrically for 2 seconds and then threw her arms around me. "Obviously," she said into my hair. I'm already envisioning the entrance. 2 weeks later, she announced her own engagement. She did it on social media with a slow-motion video of a rooftop dinner and a caption that read like a screenplay. Surprise, tears, giddy laughter. The ring twinkling like a planet. I called to congratulate her before the notifications finished exploding. She answered on the second ring, voice sugared. "Isn't it wild? Oh, sis, we'll be brides together." "I'm happy for you," I said, and meant it until she kept talking. "So," Maddie chirped, "about dates." His parents are only in the country a short window, and our venue is booked to the rafters, so we're looking at your weekend? Maybe that Saturday? She said it like asking to borrow a sweater. It could be iconic. Sisters celebrating love at the same time. We could even share vendors. Imagine the savings. My mouth went dry. "Maddie, that's our date." She laughed, a sound with sharp edges. "Dates are just numbers. Besides, think of the content. 2 brides, 1 family," I heard Laura in the background. "Tell her we'll divide the guests sensibly. People can't be in 2 places at once." Then Richard. Her crowd is smaller anyway. I'm not moving my wedding, I said, keeping my voice even with both hands. Maddie's tone cooled a degree. Wow, okay. I just thought you cared about family. We'll figure something out. We hung up. 10 minutes later, Emily texted. Saw Maddie's post. Want me to handle any overlap? I can coordinate times. I stared at the screen, bile flickering. Overlap was a word for Venn diagrams and disasters. That week felt like walking on a tilted floor. My parents sent an email about balancing attendance with bullet points, as if they were drafting a seating chart for a summit. Laura included a suggestion that I move to Sundays since Saturdays are traditionally for the younger sister. Richard added a note about optics, because Maddie's fiancé's family was flying in. When I called Ethan, he listened without interrupting, then said, Pick the future you want. I'll stand where you stand. Linda's reply to our dilemma was simpler. Whatever happens, we'll be in your pews. She included a selfie of her, Charles, and Olivia, lifting 3 paper coffee cups labeled Team Clara. I cried in a grocery store parking lot and pretended it was allergies. Little things started going sideways. An invitation to my college mentor was returned, address unknown, even though I had double-checked it. My aunt claimed she'd never received her save the date, then forwarded me a screenshot of a text from me that said we were postponing because I was overwhelmed. The grammar wasn't mine, the timing wasn't mine, but the doubt it produced slid into conversations like oil. Emily explained each mishap with professional calm. Vendors misprint, mail gets weird, people hear what they want. She promised she was on it. I wanted to believe her because the alternative felt like a crack in the foundation. 2 weeks before the wedding, Maddie posted her formal engagement party invitation. Same date, same time block, different side of town. The caption, so grateful we can all be together, celebrating love. The RSVPs flooded in under a waterfall of heart emojis. Laura called that night. Her voice the soft tone she saved for bad news she wanted me to treat like weather. Sweetheart, be reasonable. We can't be in 2 places at once. Your father and I will stop by your ceremony, then head to your sister's. We'll send a gift, of course. Of course, I repeated, tasting metal. After we hung up, I sat on the floor with the seating chart, surrounded by place cards and pens, and let the ache have a minute. Then I stood, pressed my palms flat on the table, and felt something settle inside me that wasn't resignation. It was resolve. I couldn't stop Maddie from staging a competing celebration or my parents from choosing a shinier table, but I could choose the shape of my day. I could decide who wrote my memories. I texted Ethan. No more auditions. We're keeping our date. We're keeping our joy. He replied in 3 words that felt like a promise with a ring. I'm right here. I looked at the stack of RSVP cards, some inked enthusiastically, some suspiciously absent, and pictured an aisle. It might be flanked with empty chairs from the people who had always preferred a different show. But at the end of that aisle stood a man who saw me. That, I decided, was enough light to walk by. The morning of my wedding should have carried nerves about vows and veils, not logistics and absences. But as dawn crept through my window, my phone already buzzed with messages that bent toward excuses. Aunt Carol regrets, Maddie's party conflicts, Cousin James can't attend, travel mix-up. A college mentor writes she's so sorry I postponed, hopes I'm holding up. Postponed? My hands shook. I hadn't postponed anything. Someone had fed them lies. When I confronted Emily, my maid of honor, she pressed a steady hand to my shoulder. Clara, people mishear, gossip spins. Don't spiral. Focus on Ethan. Her calm voice smoothed the edge of panic, but not the suspicion curling in my chest. Emily was supposed to be my anchor, my advocate. Instead, she seemed rehearsed. The chapel smelled of lilies, clean and bright. I'd chosen them because the florist had said they reminded her of fresh pages. As I stepped inside, clutching my bouquet, I counted the rows. Ethan's family filled them warmly, his parents beaming. His sister Olivia waving so exuberantly she made me laugh despite myself. But on my side, whole stretches of empty chairs, like teeth missing from a smile. Every gap told a story. A chair for my father, Richard, who had texted that morning. "We'll try to stop by before Maddie's event. Try." A chair for my mother, Laura, who hadn't bothered with words at all. Entire rows meant for cousins and aunts who apparently found Maddie's engagement champagne more urgent than my vows. I stood in the small waiting room before the ceremony began, veil trembling in my hands. Emily adjusted my dress with practiced efficiency, murmuring, "You look stunning. This is your moment." But her eyes darted toward her phone every few seconds, lighting up with notifications. Was she tracking Maddie's party? Messaging someone about my wedding? The ache rose sharp in my throat. 15 years of being the afterthought had prepared me for neglect. But seeing it manifested in bare pews on the day meant to celebrate love. It cut deeper than I expected. Then the door creaked open. Hannah Lewis, an old college roommate I hadn't seen in years, peeked in, holding a small clutch. "Hi," she whispered, almost shy. I know we lost touch, but I got your invite, and I thought maybe you could use one more person who actually showed up." Tears burned instantly. I hugged her, bouquet crushed between us. "You have no idea," I whispered back. When the music began, I walked the aisle not as the forgotten daughter or the invisible sister, but as a bride who carried both scars and strength. Yes, my family's seats were empty, but Ethan stood at the altar, steady as the ground. Eyes locked on me with a promise that didn't waver. His family filled the silence with presence, clapping, smiling, leaning forward as if they were claiming me for their own. I said my vows through the lump in my throat, voice clear enough to echo off the ivy-clad walls. "I choose you, Ethan, without condition, without competition, without absence." When we kissed, the applause was smaller than it should have been, but it was honest. Later, at the reception, Olivia pulled me into a dance. "Forget the empty seats," she whispered. "The people here are the ones who matter." She pointed to her parents, to Hannah at the buffet, to Ethan laughing with his best man. "See, a full life doesn't need every chair filled." I smiled, though my chest still carried the bruise. Somewhere across town, Maddie was basking in applause under glittering lights, probably basking in the thrill of outshining me. But here, on this dance floor, I was married to a man who had never once asked me to audition for his love. Still, as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the sense that the absences weren't just accidents. The missing invitations, the postponed rumors, Emily's restless eyes, it all threaded into a pattern. One I couldn't yet name, but one that would unravel soon enough. And when it did, the truth would turn out sharper than betrayal itself. The morning after the wedding smelled like coffee and lilies wilting in clean water. I woke up married and bruised in a place that didn't show on skin. Ethan slept like someone who had kept a promise. I lay beside him counting the empty chairs that had taken up residence in my head. By noon, the messages started arriving, condolences from people who hadn't died. "So sad you had to postpone. Are you okay? Heard you scaled it down to immediate family only. We didn't want to intrude. Your text said no need to come. Hope you're resting." I hadn't sent any of it. Olivia showed up with bagels and a face that belonged on your best day. "Okay," she said, opening her laptop at our kitchen table. "Let's separate hurt from hacking." "It isn't hacking," I said, though my stomach had already chosen a side. "Fine. Then let's separate lies from logistics." Hannah drifted in a few minutes later, hair in a messy knot, carrying sparkling water like it was medicine. Between bites and sips, I forwarded them the emails. Olivia scanned one, then frowned. "Look at the reply to," she said, tapping the screen. The address wasn't mine. It was clara.events@mgr@outlook-. Close enough to pass at a glance. Wrong if you actually looked. Hannah held up her phone. "And whoever texted my roommate used a new number with your picture. That means at some point someone told her you'd change numbers and she saved it. It's social, not technical." Ethan squeezed my knee. We'll follow the path, he said. Simple. Solid. I logged into our wedding website. A small banner flashed across the admin dashboard. Status changed. Event postponed 2 weeks ago, then reverted same day. Underneath, a line of gray text. Edited by Emily Carter, planner. The room swayed a degree. Emily had insisted on handling the site because those things get fussy. She had been my voice to vendors, my calendar, my calm. And 2 weeks ago she had publicly marked the event postponed, then flipped it back, quiet as a stitch. Maybe she made a mistake, I said, the sentence already thinner than paper. Or she thought she had instructions, Olivia said carefully. From you. I texted Emily, can we meet? She replied in under a minute. Of course. Same cafe as always? The cafe smelled like burnt sugar and apologies. Emily was already there. Perfect posture, perfect eyeliner, a binder on the table like armor. She stood to hug me. I stayed seated. I saw the dashboard, I said. You marked the event postponed. She swallowed. Clara, I only did it because you told me to. I didn't. You texted from your new number, she insisted, flipping open the binder to a sheet of screenshots. There I was, or at least a name labeled Clara, new, telling her to pause family communications to reduce confusion, to route all Mitchell-side updates through Maddie's central planning, to hold any mailed invitations until further notice. The phrasing was almost mine. The punctuation wasn't. Too many ellipses. Words I never use. Kindly, please, dear. My mouth tasted like metal. Why didn't you call my old number? I asked. Or ask me in person. We were together almost every day. Emily's eyes flicked down. Because you were stressed. Because your mom said you needed managing. Because Maddie told me you wanted everything quiet. She sent me the new number and said you were embarrassed to ask directly. She spread her hands. I thought I was protecting you. Protecting me. The same word people use when they take your voice and call it care. What else? I asked. I kept my voice even the way you do with something fragile you aren't sure you want to save. She exhaled. I forwarded the Excel guest list to Maddie so she could coordinate overlap, and some paper invites came back to me because the return address label was mine. I redirected them to her apartment to hand deliver. She winced. I have the stack. You can see the edges where someone peeled your labels and replaced them. Hannah, who'd come with me and taken the chair behind, leaned forward. So you became a switchboard. For her, I became gullible, Emily said, the word small and ugly in her mouth. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't relabel envelopes, I said. Then softer, because part of me still wanted the friend I thought I had. Why, Em? She stared at the table. Maddie said if I helped settle things gracefully, she'd feature me in a magazine spread she's connected to. Rising event planners. I told myself it was exposure. I told myself it would help you to have one narrative. Her voice cracked. I told myself a lot of things. A quiet, ordinary anger rose in me, not the wildfire kind, but the slow heat that keeps a room warm all winter. I need every message, every envelope, every login you used, and I need a written statement of what you did, when, and at whose request. She nodded quickly, relief flickering like bad light. I'll send it tonight. And you'll email everyone you redirected and tell them the truth, I added. No euphemisms, no miscommunications. You'll say you acted on instructions that didn't come from me. She closed her eyes. Okay. We left the cafe with a binder full of counterfeit kindness. In the car, Ethan drove, Hannah stacked screenshots. Olivia drafted a list titled Daylight to Do. It felt clinical, almost merciful. Turn pain into tasks until it can't pretend to be mystery. At home, I opened a fresh document. Record of daylight, wedding. Entry 1. Website status toggled by planner after receiving new number from sister. Guest list forwarded. Envelopes relabeled. messages phrased unlike mine. I pasted images, circled timestamps, attached the system log with Emily's username like a watermark. By evening, the first forward arrived in my inbox, my aunt's apologetic email with a screenshot of the postponed notice. An hour later, a cousin sent a thread where I had supposedly written, "No need to come if you're busy. We're keeping it small." The display name was mine. The address was the counterfeit. Just before midnight, Emily's statement landed. Dates, actions, the new number, the magazine promise. At the bottom, one last line. "I will answer for this." I stared at the words until they stopped blurring. Then I wrote the closing of the day's entry. "I will not audition for belonging. I will not argue with shadows. I will name what happened and let the naming do its work." Ethan slid a mug beside me. "What's next?" "Truth," I said. "In writing, to my parents, to Maddie." He nodded. "Daylight." I looked at our wedding photo propped against the lamp, two people laughing under a sky that didn't know about empty chairs. The picture didn't lie, neither would I. Not by silence, not by softness. Tomorrow I would send the emails. Tomorrow I would choose sentences that could stand up in any room. For the first time since the aisle, I felt the ground stop tilting. Someone had tried to steal my story with a fake number and borrowed words. I had mine back now. Password reset, location pinned, logs saved. And I intended to print it. The next morning, I drafted the email that felt heavier than vows. Not to vendors, not to cousins or distant aunts, to my parents. The subject line was a single word, daylight. I attached Emily's statement, the screenshots, the website logs. Then I wrote, "Mom, Dad, I know you believed I postponed. I know you chose Maddie's celebration because you thought mine wasn't happening, or because you thought my silence meant consent. The truth is here, invitations intercepted, addresses altered, messages faked. Emily admits to following Maddie's lead. You missed my wedding not because you weren't invited, but because you were deceived. By her, and because you wanted to be deceived." Clara, I pressed send and felt the tremor pass through me like thunder. By evening, Richard called. His voice was strained, hoarse, as though denial had worn his throat raw. "Clara, we didn't know. We thought you'd postponed. We thought you thought what was easiest," I said quietly. "You believed the daughter you've always sidelined would fold again. And Maddie handed you the story you wanted. That's not just her sabotage. That's your choice." Silence on the line, then a muffled sob. Laura's voice entered, cracked and distant. "Sweetheart, we made a mistake." "No," I said. "You made a pattern." And I ended the call. That night, Ethan held me as I shook, grief and rage braided together. He whispered what I already knew. "You can forgive later, or never, but tonight, you write." So I opened Record of Daylight again and taped the printed email chain inside. Beneath it I wrote, "When light meets paper, excuses burn." They missed my wedding by choice dressed as confusion. The next day, the storm spread wider. Maddie posted glossy photos of her engagement party, all crystal flutes and sparklers. Captions read, "Family is everything. Some sisters can't handle it, but that's their loss." Her followers flooded with comments. "Iconic. 2 brides, 1 family. Clara who?" But buried under the hearts were replies carrying screenshots of my email. Emily had forwarded her confession to everyone she'd misled. The truth was replicating faster than Maddie's hashtags. By afternoon, my inbox overflowed with apologies. Aunts, cousins, old friends. "We thought you wanted distance. We see now. We're sorry." Their regret didn't erase empty chairs, but it drew lines of accountability Maddie couldn't erase with filters. That evening, Olivia barged into our living room, laptop under her arm, cheeks flushed with indignation. "She's doubling down," she said, spinning the screen toward me. Maddie had gone live, painting herself as the maligned younger sister. just trying to celebrate love while being sabotaged by jealousy. I almost laughed at the projection. She learned theater well, I murmured. Ethan leaned forward. So what's your move? I looked at the wedding photo pinned above my desk, the smaller crowd, the honest smiles, the aisle I walked anyway. Then I answered, not theater, testimony. I drafted another statement, short, surgical. No accusations, just documentation. I uploaded Emily's signed confession, the website logs, the altered envelopes. Caption, for those asking where I was at my wedding, where my vows were witnessed by those who showed up. The rest of the story is in the record. I posted it once and closed the laptop. Within hours, the narrative flipped. Hashtags shifted from hashtag Team Maddie to hashtag Daylight Record. Influencers dissected screenshots. Journalists requested interviews. And for the first time in years, people weren't just seeing Maddie's performance. They were seeing me. That night, Margaret knocked softly at the study door. She carried a candle, its flame steady. You turned her fire into yours, she said. No, I corrected gently, sliding the record of daylight onto the shelf. I turned her fire into light. And as I blew out the candle, I realized the ache of the empty chairs had dulled. Not gone, but transformed. Into proof that the people who mattered had always been the ones who stayed. By noon the next day, the internet had divided itself into camps with slogans. Team Daylight trended beside Tosh Protect Maddie. Threaded through both were strangers who loved a stage more than a story. I turned my phone face down and made eggs I didn't eat. Maddie escalated before the pan cooled. A local morning show posted a teaser clip. My sister on a gray couch, voice trembling just enough to test microphones. I've always supported Clara, she said to the host. But she's been unstable. I tried to help. The Chiron read Sister Speaks, when jealousy ruins a wedding like the verdict had been printed before the trial. Olivia watched beside me, jaw tight. They booked her because drama pays, she said. But drama hates documentation. Hannah arrived with a canvas tote full of ink cartridges and apple slices, which is how you know who actually loves you. So, she said, dropping the tote on the table, do we meet her or starve the beast? Ethan poured coffee. We do what protects you, he said simply. My mind kept circling the same point. I didn't want another screen war. I wanted her to look at the proof in daylight without an audience to feed. If she broke in front of a camera, she'd just build a new mask. If she broke in front of the record, maybe it would count. I texted, neutral location. Today, 5 p.m., no press, 2 witnesses each, everything in writing, break a rule, and it ends. She replied in seconds, fine, that cafe by the river. At 4:50, the 4 of us walked in, me, Ethan, Olivia, and Hannah. A late winter sun lay low over the water, every ripple catching light the way good paper does. Maddie arrived with our parents. Laura wore remorse like a delicate scarf. Richard looked carved smaller. Maddie wore white, not accidental. I set a slim folder on the table. Ground rules, I said. I speak, you listen. Then you speak. We don't talk over each other. We sign a summary at the end. Maddie rolled her eyes. You turned a coffee into court. No, I said. Into clarity. I slid the first page across, Emily's signed statement. Maddie didn't touch it. Laura did, hands shaking. It wasn't me, Maddie said quickly, before anyone could breathe. Emily is lying to save her job. Or you forged it. Everyone knows PDFs are easy. I turned the next page, the wedding site admin log with edited by Emily Carter, planner, stamped on the right, time stamped 2 weeks before the ceremony. This is not a PDF trick. It's the platform's audit trail. It also shows your IP address from the night invitations were marked postponed in the guest view. Maddie's mouth opened, then shut. Richard leaned forward, eyebrows knitting. Is that conclusive? It's conclusive enough, I said. And even if it weren't, there are the envelopes Emily admitted were relabeled and rerouted to Maddie's apartment. which, unless the stamp migrated on its own, required hands. Maddie's voice softened, switch flipped. Clara, I did what I had to so the family didn't split. Your wedding would have embarrassed Mom with all the half-empty rows. I was protecting the family. Protecting, I repeated, the word tasting like old metal. You protected your spotlight. You protected their habit of choosing it. You didn't protect me. Laura's eyes filled. She swallowed a sob like a confession. We believed her. We wanted to. Wanting is a choice, I said. It came out less cruel than clean. Maddie reached for theatrics. You've always hated me. I shook my head. I've always hated being erased. There's a difference. For a moment, no one spoke. The cafe hissed milk and ground beans. A kid at the next table laughed. Ordinary life kept happening, which felt somehow like mercy. I pushed the summary sheet to the middle of the table. Here's what accountability will look like. 1. Written apologies to every guest who received false information. Signed by you and by Emily. Name the lie plainly. 2. Reimburse our out-of-pocket costs caused by your actions. Reprints, courier fees, losses. I've itemized them. 3. A letter to me, not for public consumption, that acknowledges what you did and why. No justifications, no if you felt. 4. You do not use this for content. No lives, no subtweets, no pity interviews. If you break that, I pursue legal remedies for interference and defamation. I've already spoken to counsel. Maddie scoffed. Or what? You'll sue your sister. If I have to protect my life from my sister, yes. Richard finally found a register that sounded like a father, not a defense attorney. Madeline, he said, voice low, read the page. She skimmed it, eyes catching on numbers, dates, proper nouns that don't bend to mood. This is punishment. This is consequence, I said. Punishment is about pain. Consequence is about math. Laura reached across the table, not for me, but for the pen. Her hand hovered, trembled, landed. I'm ashamed, she whispered. We left you with empty chairs and called it logistics. We let her write our story because she wrote it in a voice we preferred. She signed. The scratch of ink sounded louder than chatter. Richard signed next. Then he pushed the pen toward Maddie. She stared at it like it was a small animal that might bite. Clara, she said softly, I didn't think you'd stand this firm. Then you never paid attention to how hard I worked to stand at all, she signed. Fast, angry, as if speed could minimize ink. I slid copies toward Olivia and Hannah. They initialed as witnesses, faces steady the way you pray your friends' faces will be when the ground shifts under you. Last thing, I said, the kids. If there are cousins, nieces, nephews who need help, you route requests through me with documentation. Schools, clinics, bills. I'll pay directly, not through you, not as leverage. Just because innocence shouldn't inherit our mess. For the first time, Maddie's mask cracked without performance beneath it. Why would you do that for people who might hate you? Because I hated being a child defined by adult decisions, I said. They won't be. The meeting ended with the dull scrape of chairs. No hugs, no staged reconciliation. Outside, the river moved on, water doing what water does, carving stone over time. Back home, we filed the signed pages into Record of Daylight. In the margin, I wrote, she called it punishment. It is a mirror. She called it jealousy. It is math. Then I tucked the book away and let fatigue find me. At dusk, Olivia stood at the window, watching the last light smear gold over rooftops. You know she'll test the edges, she said. I know, I replied. But edges hold when they're drawn in ink. Hannah lit a small candle on the counter. Our older neighbor, Margaret, had dropped it by the night before with a note that said for the rooms that deserve warm light. We'd adopted her from down the hall. She'd adopted us right back. The flame caught, steady and unafraid. Ethan wrapped his arms around me from behind. What now? Now, I said, feeling the answer settle like a vow. I stop writing defense. I write a life. and outside, the city agreed. Street lamps blinking on in orderly rows, each one a small circle of daylight that had simply learned to work the night shift. The signed papers did not erase history. They didn't fill the empty seats in the chapel or rewrite years of being overlooked, but they did something almost as powerful. They drew a line. For the first time, my parents and Maddie had to see themselves in black ink, and that line separated truth from theater. The aftershock came quickly. Maddie stayed quiet online for 3 days, a record for her. When she returned, her tone had shifted. No more accusations of jealous sisters or claims of sabotage. Instead, she posted filtered shots of her ring and captions about choosing joy despite negativity. It was still performance, but a smaller one, like a flame running out of oxygen. My parents, meanwhile, tried to mend in private. Laura sent emails thick with apologies, almost daily. We should have been better. We see it now. Richard wrote fewer words, but heavier ones. You were right. We believed what was convenient. That's on us. I didn't reply to every message. I wasn't ready, but I kept them, printed, and slid them into the record of daylight. Not as proof against them, this time as proof they could learn. Ethan watched me file them away one evening and said, "You don't have to save everything." "I do," I answered. Because saving the record isn't about holding grudges. It's about remembering what's real when people try to rewrite it. Work at Heart Secure picked up, and for the first time, I felt my professional life wasn't just an escape from family wounds. It was a parallel story of building walls strong enough to keep shadows out. Transparency had become our brand, and investors loved it. I realized I was running my company the way I was running my life. Daylight as policy, not just metaphor. But healing isn't linear. One night, Hannah came over with Thai takeout, and while Ethan and Olivia argued about which rom-com to watch, I scrolled through old family photos on my laptop. There was Maddie at her 16th birthday, 3-tier cake, and a rented hall. I was in the background, blurry, half out of the frame. The image gutted me. "Why do you keep looking?" Hannah asked gently, taking the laptop from me. "Because part of me still wants to understand," I admitted. What did she have that I didn't? Why was I always the afterthought? Hannah leaned forward. She had their attention, you had their blind spot. That's not the same as worth. Her words landed with the force of truth. Maddie hadn't been better, she had just been easier to applaud. And my parents had mistaken convenience for love. Later that night, after Hannah left, Ethan pulled me close. "You're still measuring yourself against them," he said. "I'm measuring the wound," I whispered. "Then let it scar. Scars don't vanish, but they don't bleed either." The days grew quieter. Maddie signed her letters grudgingly and sent them out. Cousins began reaching back, some apologetic, some awkward. One even admitted, "We always knew she twisted things, but it was easier to go along." That confession hurt more than anger. It was the truth of complicity. But the silence from Maddie's fiancé was louder than anything. He hadn't called me, hadn't written, hadn't reached across the fire she lit. And I wondered if he even knew how much of the inferno had been hers alone. One evening, I wrote in the record of daylight, "Aftershock is quieter than the quake, but it reshapes just as much. The ground holds, but differently. I'm learning how to stand on it." I closed the book, blew out the candle Hannah had left, and finally let myself rest. Maddie's engagement party arrived like a thundercloud. Everyone pretended was a rainbow. Invitations had gone out weeks earlier. Glossy cardstock with gold foil lettering, the kind of detail my parents would have raved about if it had been mine. I hadn't planned to go. I had Ethan, I had peace, and I had no interest in watching Maddie perform joy like a one-woman Broadway show. But the night before, Laura called. Her voice was thick, careful, as if she'd rehearsed every word. "Clara, please. If you come, people will see we're together again. It will mean something." "Mean what?" I asked. "That you're family," she whispered. I almost hung up. Then I remembered the record of daylight, how truth wasn't just for defense but for presence. If Maddie spun her narrative under chandeliers and champagne, maybe daylight needed to walk into the same room. So I went. The venue was a riverside hall, glass walls glowing against the dark. Inside, everything gleamed. Crystal flutes, roses in towers, Maddie in a sequined gown, the color of champagne. She saw me the moment I walked in, her smile flickering for half a second, before she raised her voice so everyone could hear. "Clara, you came!" Eyes turned. Conversations stilled. My parents exhaled as if I had just agreed to a treaty. I crossed the room with Ethan's hand steady in mine. Olivia and Hannah flanked us, quiet guardians. Maddie air-kissed my cheek, her perfume sharp enough to sting. "You look brave," she said, tone dipped in honey and acid. "And you look rehearsed," I replied softly. Her smile froze, just for a blink. Dinner was long tables and curated playlists. Maddie's fiancé gave a toast, earnest and oblivious, about love being the foundation of family. People clapped. Then Maddie stood, glass raised. "I'm grateful for all the support," she said, eyes sweeping the crowd, even when some people try to overshadow happiness with drama. It was bait, the kind she dangled expecting me to bite. I didn't. I stood slowly, placed my glass on the table, and said clearly, "I'd like to add something." The room hushed. Maddie's smile strained. "I want to thank those who showed up for my wedding," I said, voice steady. It was smaller than I planned, emptier in places, but it was real, and I want to say this. Truth matters more than performance. Lies stole chairs from my day, but they didn't steal the vows I made or the family I gained. That record is permanent. That joy is permanent. A ripple moved. Through the room, confusion, whispers, some applause. Maddie's cheeks flared pink. "Clara," she began, but I held up a hand. "No debates," I said calmly. "Not here, not anymore." I sat back down, Ethan's hand finding mine under the table, his squeeze a quiet victory. Across from me, Olivia grinned like someone watching a rival finally meet her match. Hannah mouthed, "Perfect." Maddie finished her toast quickly, voice thinner now. The rest of the evening unfolded with forced laughter and polite clinking, but the balance had shifted. People looked at her differently, not the flawless star, but the sister with shadows. When we left, Laura followed me to the door. Her eyes were wet, her voice small. "You carried yourself with grace," she whispered. "I carried myself with truth," I corrected. "Grace will take longer." At home, I taped the party's program into the record of daylight and wrote beneath it, "Masks glitter, but daylight dulls them." Tonight, I didn't argue, I witnessed. And that was enough. For the first time, I didn't ache walking away from her spotlight. I carried my own. The fallout didn't wait long. By the next morning, social media feeds were buzzing with clips from Maddie's party. Someone had filmed my brief toast, my calm voice cutting through her performance, and posted it with the caption, "Truth doesn't need sequins." By noon, the video had more shares than Maddie's choreographed engagement montage. For once, I didn't flinch at the comments. People weren't arguing over hashtags this time. They were saying things like, "You can feel who's honest," and "that older sister carries weight." It wasn't validation I'd chased all my life. It was recognition earned without begging. Ethan scrolled through his phone, then set it down with a small smile. "The crowd saw you, not the character she cast you as. The real you." But the most surprising message came privately, 2 nights later, from Maddie's fiancé. "Can we talk? Just us. I think I've been missing pieces." I read it twice, then showed Ethan. He nodded. "Meet him, but not alone. Daylight, remember?" So we met in a quiet corner of a downtown cafe. Hannah at the next table pretending to read a novel. He arrived looking worn, shadows under his eyes, none of the sparkle Maddie's post tried to sell. "I don't want to be dragged into your feud," he started, voice tired. "But since the party, I've been hearing things. Guests saying they never got your invitations. Your planner confessing. Screenshots I can't ignore. Maddie told me you were jealous, that you wanted to sabotage her happiness. He paused, searching my face. But when I watched you the other night, it didn't look like jealousy. It looked like survival. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. That's because it was. She built her stage on my silence, and I stopped letting her. He nodded slowly, pain flickering across his expression. She's not who I thought in some ways, but I love her, and I need to decide what to do with the truth. I leaned forward, voice quiet but firm. Then decide with open eyes, not filtered ones. I don't need you to take sides. I need you to see clearly. For yourself. He left with a polite handshake, but his shoulders sagged under weight that wasn't mine to carry. Hannah slid into his empty chair. That man's foundations are shaking, she murmured. And she was right. The next week, Maddie's posts grew erratic, grand declarations of unbothered bliss, paired with captions that read like veiled attacks. She live-streamed a shopping spree with a brittle laugh, then deleted the video an hour later. Her mask was slipping, and the cracks were visible to anyone willing to look. Meanwhile, my parents stayed quieter, emails arriving less often but more thoughtful. Laura wrote, "We're watching you stand in ways we didn't teach you to. That humbles me more than I can say." Richard added once, "I see you, Clara." Just 3 words, but heavier than all his past silence. One night, I sat with Ethan on the balcony. City lights below like scattered confetti. "It feels like the storm is moving," I said. "It is," he answered. "But not all storms destroy. Some clear the air." I opened the record of daylight and taped the screenshot of Maddie's fiancé's message inside. Beneath it I wrote, "Even her foundation questions her now. Lies can build a spotlight, but they can't hold weight. The cracks always come." And as I closed the book, for the first time I felt the ache of old neglect easing into something else. Not victory, not yet, but relief. Weeks passed, and the storm that had defined my wedding, my family, even my name began to fade. Not because it had vanished, but because it had nowhere left to feed. Maddie tried once more to reclaim the stage, an elaborate photo shoot in a vineyard, captioned, "Nothing breaks a bond like sisterhood." The comments, though, were different now. People asked hard questions. Some even linked Emily's confession. Maddie never answered. The silence around her glitter began to sound like truth settling in. My parents visited quietly, without announcements or gifts. Laura brought a pie she didn't try to pass off as apology. Richard sat at my kitchen table, eyes on his coffee, and finally said, "We failed you, Clara, not once, not twice, for years. We can't erase it, but we can stop repeating it." I didn't cry. I didn't rush to forgive. I simply nodded and said, "Then stop repeating." For the first time, the words didn't feel like armor. They felt like boundaries. Ethan and I built routines that had nothing to do with family drama. Sunday hikes, movie nights with Olivia and Hannah, dinners that ended with laughter instead of tension. I realized that chosen family wasn't just a phrase. It was a lifeline. The record of daylight grew thicker, pages filled with emails, screenshots, signed letters. But one night, as spring unfurled outside, I closed the book and placed it on the highest shelf. Not hidden, not buried, just finished. Ethan watched me do it. "The end?" he asked. "The close," I corrected. Stories like this don't end. They quiet, they scar, and then they make room for better stories. He kissed my forehead, and I leaned into the man who had never once asked me to fight for visibility. With him, I wasn't an afterthought. I was the center of a life we were building together. On our anniversary, Olivia surprised us with a framed photo from the wedding. One taken by Hannah on her phone, candid and imperfect. In it, Ethan and I were laughing under a spill of lilies, the light catching the ruby ring Eleanor had once pressed into my palm. The chairs behind us were half empty, but our joy filled the frame. I hung it in our living room, not as a reminder of who wasn't there, but as proof of what was. Proof that truth outlasts theater, that love outshines absence, and that sometimes revenge isn't fire, it's simply daylight. And as I stood back, the picture glowing in the evening light, I whispered to myself the last line I would ever write in the record of daylight. They excluded me. I endured. They lied. I documented. They left me empty chairs. I filled them with presents. This story is closed.